The first thing he did after buying the truck was to just sit inside it. Not to drive, not to start the engine, just sit there. Windows rolled down, dust still on the dash, and for a moment it felt like he wasn't sitting in a truck, but inside a memory that didn't belong to him. If stories like this quiet one speak to you, consider giving this video a like and subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Now, let's go back to where it began, with a tired man, a curious boy, and a red truck waiting in someone else's backyard. The last turn wasn't marked on the GPS. Tyler noticed it too late. Gravel crunched beneath his tires as the road narrowed, winding between two rows of dry cottonwoods. The kind of trees that whispered secrets when the wind moved just right. He slowed down, eyes scanning the mailbox numbers. One of them, rusted and barely legible, matched the scribbled address on the folded sticky note in his shirt pocket. The place looked more forgotten than abandoned. A modest one-story house, white paint faded to gray, front porch sagging just slightly at the corner. A bird feeder hung crooked from a tree limb, empty but still swinging like it remembered company. The grass was patchy, overtaken by dirt and stubborn weeds, and behind the house, partially hidden under the shadow of an old barn, sat the reason he was here, an aging, forest green pickup truck. It wasn't beautiful. In fact, it looked like it hadn't moved in years. One headlight was fogged over, the fender on the driver's side dented in like something large and careless had backed into it. But there was something about the way it sat, solid, unmoved by time, that made Tyler stop breathing for just a second. From the back seat, Noah stirred. "Is this it?" Tyler looked in the rearview mirror. His son's face was pressed against the glass, eyes wide, hands still holding the crumpled paper bag that held their breakfast from 2 hours ago. "Yeah," Tyler said. "This is it." He killed the engine and stepped out. The heat hit him first dry, baked in the ground heat that wrapped around his boots and climbed into his jeans. This wasn't the kind of place you passed through. It was the kind of place people ended up when there weren't many other options left. He opened the back door for Noah, reaching out a hand. The boy took it without a word. His small fingers were warm, sticky with orange juice. Tyler didn't mind. They walked up the path together, gravel crunching underfoot. A screen door creaked from the side of the house. Tyler turned just as a woman stepped onto the porch. She was older than he expected, late 50s, maybe early 60s. Short silver hair tucked behind one ear, shoulders squared like someone who didn't care much for small talk. Her eyes were sharp but not unkind, just watchful, measuring. "You must be Tyler," she said. He nodded. "That's me, and this is my son, Noah." The woman gave Noah a quick glance, then looked back at Tyler. "I'm Irene, the truck's out back. Thought you might be later." "Road wasn't marked," he replied. She didn't laugh, but something softened in her expression. "Nothing out here is." They followed her around the side of the house. Noah lagged behind, kicking at a rock with the toe of his shoe. When they reached the truck, Irene stood back, arms crossed. Tyler walked slowly around the vehicle, trailing his hand along the side like he was remembering something he hadn't lived. There was a piece of duct tape over the back window. The tires looked, well, not good, but not flat either. A wasp's nest dangled from the side mirror, long abandoned. "Hasn't been driven in a while," Irene said, "but it still turns over." Tyler opened the driver's side door. It groaned in protest. The inside smelled like dust and heat. A set of keys hung from the ignition. A cassette tape lay cracked and yellowed on the passenger seat. He didn't touch anything yet. Noah climbed up beside him, crouched on the step rail. "It smells like old shoes," he whispered. Tyler grinned. "That's how you know it's got character." He leaned in, resting his hand on the steering wheel. The leather was cracked but firm. Something about it felt grounded, familiar. and it unsettled him in a way he couldn't explain. Irene stood a few steps away, arms still folded, watching them both like a witness to something she didn't fully understand, but maybe had expected anyway. Tyler stepped back and nodded, more to himself than to her. Let's see if she runs. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, twice, then roared to life. Uneven at first, then steadier, like an old dog waking up for something worth moving for. He shut it off after a few seconds. Dust settled around them. The silence returned. Noah looked up. Are we buying it? Tyler didn't answer. He just kept staring at the truck, at the way it sat under the shadow of the barn like it had waited. And somewhere deep in his chest, something began to stir. Irene didn't offer her hand. She simply nodded as if that was greeting enough, then turned and started walking toward the back of the house. No small talk, no pleasantries, no nice to meet you. Tyler didn't mind. He'd been in enough military briefings to recognize someone who spoke when they had something to say and not a moment sooner. Come on, buddy, he said to Noah, and they followed her around the corner of the house, stepping over a rusted garden hose that hadn't seen water in years. The backyard was a patchwork of dry grass and red dirt. A swing set sat off to the side, one swing missing. The other tangled around the top bar like a ghost of someone's childhood. Beyond that, the barn loomed, faded red paint peeling like old skin. The truck rested in its shadow, still and waiting. Irene moved with purpose, her steps crisp despite the uneven ground. She didn't glance back to see if they were following. She didn't need to. People like her never walked for show. She stopped a few feet from the truck and turned toward Tyler. Bought it in '87. My husband drove it every day until he didn't. Tyler raised an eyebrow at the choice of words. What stopped him? She hesitated. He passed. Long time ago. Tyler nodded slowly. I'm sorry. Nothing to be sorry for, she said. Life does what it does. Her voice was low, slightly hoarse, the kind that carried the dust of the desert and the weight of unsaid things. She stepped closer to the truck and reached for the side mirror, adjusting it as if by habit. The mirror didn't move, neither did she for a moment. Noah tugged on Tyler's sleeve. Dad, is that a birdhouse? He pointed to a box nailed high on the barn wall. I think so, Tyler said. Irene answered without turning around. It is. He made it for wrens. They never came. Silence settled again. It wasn't uncomfortable, just heavy. The kind of silence that meant something had been felt, even if no one wanted to admit what it was. Tyler walked up to the truck, letting his fingers brush the door handle. I'll be honest, I'm not looking for perfect, just something that can run. She runs, Irene said, but she ain't perfect. That made Tyler smile a little. Neither am I. She looked at him then, really looked, eyes pale, almost gray, like smoke after a fire. There was something in her gaze, some flicker of recognition or memory or just plain human fatigue. You served, she said quietly. Tyler paused, hand still resting on the truck. I did. Army? Marines. 2 tours. Irene nodded once. He was Navy. Worked with ground teams sometimes, that's all I'll say about it. Fair enough, Tyler said. The sun shifted behind the clouds, casting a long shadow from the barn across the truck. Irene stepped back, folding her arms again, her face unreadable. You can start it if you want. Keys are in the ignition. He looked at her, surprised by the sudden offer. But she was already walking away, heading toward the porch like her part of the exchange was over. Let the boy run around. Just watch the well. Cover's not steady. Tyler looked back at Noah, who was already squatting near a row of rocks, poking at something with a stick. He nodded. Got it. Irene didn't reply. The screen door creaked again, and then she was gone. Tyler stood alone beside the truck, wind rustling his shirt. He glanced up at the sky-wide blue untouched. The house, the yard, the silence. They all felt like they'd been waiting for something. Maybe not him, but maybe someone like him. The keys dangled from the ignition like they'd been waiting for someone to finish a sentence left hanging. Tyler slid into the driver's seat, the vinyl creaking beneath him. Dust rose in lazy spirals from the dashboard. The smell hit him first. Sun-baked fabric, engine oil, and something older. Like the pages of a forgotten book. He rested both hands on the steering wheel, feeling its cracks and worn grooves. It was strangely intimate, like holding the hand of someone who'd seen things you hadn't. Tyler didn't start the engine just yet. He was listening. Noah, somewhere outside the truck, was talking to a lizard near the fence post. Tyler let the boy's voice fade into the background like a soundtrack he didn't need to control. His fingers drifted down to the space beneath the dash. Something sharp pricked him. He pulled back. A thin red line appeared on the side of his thumb. "Damn," he muttered under his breath. He reached again, this time more carefully. His fingertips brushed against something cool and solid. He pinched it gently, tugged, and brought it out into the light. It was a curved piece of metal, about the size of a matchbook, blackened at the edges. The surface was dented and warped, but still intact. The shape was familiar, not in the way you remember a tool, but in the way your body remembers a scar. For a second he couldn't breathe. His thumb traced the curve. The feel of it in his palm stirred something he hadn't let surface in years. Heat, smoke, the sound of metal shrieking, a flash of light and a voice yelling through it all. Tyler blinked. His throat tightened. He looked out the windshield, suddenly unsure where he was, like his mind had shifted timelines. It can't be, he thought, but it was. He turned the piece of metal over. A small marking was etched on the side, half-burned, barely visible. A number, a code. He'd seen it before, or something like it. In the war, in the desert, in the wreckage of that Humvee. The memory came back like water breaching a dam. That night, the explosion. Being dragged from the fire, coughing, screaming, the voice that said, "You're not dying today, move!" He had never seen the man's face, but this little shard, it felt like a breadcrumb. He looked over at Noah, still crouched near the rocks. The boy glanced up and grinned. Tyler tried to return it, but his mouth was dry. He opened the glove compartment. Old napkins, a cracked flashlight, nothing else. The metal piece lay in his hand, warm now from his skin. This truck wasn't just old. It wasn't just broken down. It remembered things. And somewhere deep in its rust and wires and dust, it remembered him. "You can come in for a glass of water," Irene said without looking at him. It didn't sound like an offer. More like a statement made out of habit, something she'd say whether or not she wanted company. Tyler hesitated a second, then called to Noah, who came running with dirt on his knees and a plastic soldier clutched in one hand. The screen door squeaked open, then shut behind them with a thump. Inside, the house was cool and dim shadows settled into corners like they had lived there longer than the furniture. The air carried a stillness that felt deliberate, as if someone had told the wind not to breathe too loudly. Irene moved through the living room like she was walking through a memory she didn't want to disturb. Every step quiet, every motion restrained. Tyler noticed the details in flashes. A ceramic dish with loose change, yellowed receipts, a bookshelf with spines turned inward, a clock with no batteries but still ticking in his head, the faint scent of cedar and lemon polish. Noah wandered toward the hallway but stopped at a quiet look from Irene. She nodded toward a small table near the front window. "You can sit there." The boy obeyed without protest. Irene disappeared into the kitchen. Tyler stood awkwardly for a second, then let himself take 2 slow steps farther into the room. That was when he saw the photograph. It was the only picture on the wall. Framed in dark wood, slightly crooked, a man in uniform dress whites. Navy, judging by the cut and color, mid-30s, strong jaw, clear eyes. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't grim either, just steady like the kind of man people trusted with things that couldn't be dropped. There was no nameplate, no date, just the photo. Tyler didn't move for a long moment. Something about the man pulled at him, familiar not in face but in presence, like a rhythm he once marched to but hadn't heard in years. "That's Hank," Irene said, reappearing with 2 glasses of water. Tyler turned. She handed him 1 glass, kept the other. "He was Navy?" She nodded, taking a seat in the corner armchair. 22 years, not all of it at sea." Her voice had changed. It was softer now, but still grounded, like stone smoothed by weather, not weariness. Tyler glanced back at the photo, then at her. Was he stationed overseas? Sometimes. He never brought much of it home. There was no bitterness in her voice, no pride either, just fact. Tyler didn't press. He knew the rules. If someone gives you the headline, don't go digging for the footnotes. He sat down at the table across from Noah, who had started tracing patterns on the foggy glass with 1 finger. "How long's it been?" Tyler asked. Irene looked at her glass like she'd forgotten it was there. 17 years last spring." Tyler let out a quiet breath. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "It was a long time ago, but the quiet stayed." They didn't speak for a while, just the ticking of the dead clock on the shelf and the sound of Noah humming something tuneless under his breath. Tyler took a sip of water. It was cold and surprisingly crisp. Irene stood. "The truck's yours if you want it. I don't have use for it. Never did, really." He looked up at her. "Can I come back tomorrow? Give it a full look?" She considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Morning's best. Heat sets in early." Tyler stood and thanked her. Noah followed him to the door. Before they left, Tyler looked once more at the photo on the wall. He didn't know the man's name, but something inside him had already begun stitching pieces together. Not a face, but maybe a place, a moment, a night when fire lit up the sky and someone reached into the flames and said, "Not today." The motel room wasn't much: 2 beds, a rattling air conditioner, and the kind of thin carpet that kept its secrets. Tyler had stayed in worse, he'd slept in worse, but tonight the bed felt unfamiliar in a way he couldn't shake. Noah was already out cold, curled on his side with 1 leg dangling off the mattress. Tyler watched him for a minute, then turned off the lamp beside the bed and pulled his old duffel from the closet. He hadn't opened this bag in years. It still smelled like sunblock, dirt, and that distinct metallic scent of sweat soaked into canvas. A combination that always brought him back. Not to the war itself, but the hours between the war. The waiting, the writing, the wondering what they'd bring home with them. He knelt on the carpet and unzipped the front pocket. Inside, a folded envelope yellowed by time, edges frayed, name handwritten on the flap. Tyler Grant, Echo Company, Kandahar Sector, 2009-2011. He didn't hesitate. He opened it. Inside were 3 things: a weathered mission report, a photocopy of a casualty list, and a loose photograph of a burning Humvee someone else must have taken from a distance. Tyler laid the papers out on the bedspread and smoothed them with both hands. The mission report had been typed, redacted in places. He knew it by heart. He'd read it 100 times the month after he came home, trying to make sense of what had happened. Trying to find the man who had dragged him out of that wreckage and disappeared into the smoke. No name had ever been given. Just this sentence: "One unidentified Navy ground operative assisted in recovery of Corporal Grant, Name unconfirmed, presumed attached to temporary joint operations unit. That line had haunted him. Unidentified, unconfirmed, gone. He read it again tonight, but slower. Not looking for logic, just looking. Then he saw it. Buried in a parenthetical at the bottom of page 2. Support coordination. Lieutenant H. Carter. Nav Spicops. Operating theater. 9. His hand froze. The name burned into his brain like a flare. Carter. He sat back slowly, heart beating in the back of his throat. Could it be that simple? No, it couldn't. Carter was a common name. There had to be a dozen Carters in the Navy that year. Maybe more. But this Carter had boots on the ground. This Carter was there that night. Tyler reached into the bag again, pulling out the warped metal fragment from the truck. He set it down next to the report. Same weight, same curve. Same impossible connection. He picked up the mission photo again. Smoke and fire. A figure blurred behind the flames. Could have been anyone. But his gut, the part of him that survived things his brain still hadn't processed, told him the truth. This wasn't coincidence. This was alignment. He sat in the dark, fingers resting on the edge of the paper, staring at the name, Lieutenant H. Carter. He didn't know how to feel. Gratitude, grief, guilt for not knowing sooner, maybe just something heavier, something wordless. The kind of feeling that made you look up at the ceiling and wonder what the hell you were supposed to do with what you just found. Tyler looked over at Noah again. The boy slept soundly, mouth slightly open, arms thrown wide like he owned the room. Tyler whispered into the still air, "Thank you. Whoever you are. Thank you." Then he whispered again, softer, "What the hell were you doing in that truck?" He didn't sleep much. By sunrise, the motel room felt smaller. Tyler stood at the sink brushing his teeth while the sun painted long lines across the cracked tile floor. Noah stirred once, then fell back into sleep, tangled in the sheets. Tyler left him a note by the lamp and stepped out into the morning. The road back to Irene's was quiet, no cars, just the sound of his tires chewing gravel. When he pulled in, the house looked exactly the same. Still, waiting. She was already outside, watering a half-dead rosemary bush with a tin can. No hose in sight. "You're early," she said without turning around. "I figured the heat would come soon. It always does." He walked toward her, the mission report folded inside his jacket pocket like a secret too hot to hold barehanded. "I wanted to ask you something." Irene lowered the can. "If it's about the truck, it still runs." "It's not about the truck," he said quietly. She didn't move. Tyler hesitated, then pulled the folded page from his pocket and held it out. "I found this. It's from a mission I was on 13 years ago. There's a name buried in it. A Navy Lieutenant H. Carter." Irene didn't reach for the paper. She just looked at him, unreadable. "I thought, maybe your husband?" She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Wait here." She disappeared into the house. Tyler stood by the steps, not knowing what to do with his hands. The sky was starting to pale into that familiar New Mexico heat haze. A bird called once from somewhere he couldn't see. When Irene returned, she held a small metal bar, the kind soldiers used for tools or letters or coins. She opened it slowly and pulled out a battered rectangle of laminated plastic. The edges were worn, the lettering faded, but the name was clear. Lieutenant Hank Carter, U.S. Navy. She handed it to Tyler without a word. His fingers closed around it. The name hit him like weight, not noise, not thunder, just the slow, hard settling of truth, like sand in a jar. He looked up at her. "I think he saved my life." She didn't blink. A lot of men said that. Hank was the kind of person who didn't ask for permission to help. He just moved. Tyler looked down at the card again. "He pulled me out of a burning Humvee. I never saw his face." Now she blinked, slowly. When? Kandahar, October, 2010. Irene stepped back like someone had nudged her chest. She sat on the porch step without saying anything. That was his last deployment, she said quietly. He came back different, not broken, just quieter, like some part of him stayed out there. Tyler crouched beside her. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. They sat like that for a long time, the truck behind them, the porch creaking under their shared weight, the card still in his hand. Finally, Irene said, "You want the truck? Take it. You don't have to pay me." He shook his head. "That's not why I came back." "Why did you?" Tyler looked toward the garden where Noah had planted his first row of carrots yesterday. "Because I think there's more of him here. And maybe I'm supposed to know who he was." Irene didn't answer. But this time she didn't tell him to leave either. The sound came first, a low thud that didn't register right away, not until the second one hit closer. Then the sky cracked open, not with lightning, but with the scream of metal and fire. Tyler remembered the heat, not just the heat of the desert, but something deeper, something that peeled the air out of your lungs and made the ground itself feel angry. He'd been in the passenger seat of a Humvee, fourth in convoy. They were moving through a narrow street outside Kandahar, early morning. A recon loop. Routine. Nothing about that day had been routine. The explosion took out the lead vehicle in a burst of dirt and orange light. The second blast, his vehicle came less than 3 seconds later. He remembered flipping, the weightlessness, the sick sound of metal folding in on itself. Then the impact. Everything after that was chaos. Black smoke pouring in through shattered windows, someone screaming for help. He thought it was him, but he couldn't tell. His head was ringing. His leg was pinned under the console. Blood, but no pain yet. Just the paralyzing knowledge that something inside him had shifted, dislocated, or broken, or burned. He tried to move, couldn't. He shouted again, and then a hand, rough, strong, unmistakably human. "I got you." The voice cut through the smoke, not loud, not panicked, firm, controlled. "You're not dying today." Tyler's eyes stung too much to see clearly. He caught the outline of a man in tactical gear, not one of his team, not someone he knew. The man moved fast, not frantic, but with purpose. He used a crowbar or a weapon Tyler couldn't see to pry open the mangled console, then looped one arm under Tyler's chest. "Can you walk?" Tyler shook his head, barely conscious. "Then hold on." The drag out of the Humvee felt like an eternity. Fire was licking at the floorboards. Something exploded behind them as they cleared the vehicle. The man didn't stop. He pulled Tyler to a low wall across the road, dumped him behind it like a sack of flour, then knelt. "You got a name?" "Tyler," he managed. "Good. Keep saying it." The man ripped open a pouch, started checking his wounds. But then, before Tyler could ask anything else, he was gone. Just like that. Gone into the smoke, like a ghost or a shadow or some soldier-shaped myth made of grit and timing. Reinforcements came 5 minutes later. The medevac 10 after that. Tyler was half lucid by then. He tried to describe the man. No one matched. No one owned it. And the records? A mystery. No listed operative on joint orders. No Navy unit officially present. Just that redacted note. Unidentified Navy operative. Now, sitting in the front seat of that old truck under a dusty New Mexico sky. Tyler felt the memory grip him like it never had before. His hand gripped the steering wheel the same way he'd gripped that wall. The smell of scorched leather matched the memory of burning rubber. And somewhere deep in the frame of this truck under rust and time was the same voice. "You're not dying today." He exhaled slowly, not because it hurt, but because for the first time he understood what it meant to survive something and not know who to thank. Until now. By late morning, the sun had settled into its full glare, baking the dry earth until the air shimmered like water. Tyler wiped his hands on his jeans, then knocked on Irene's front door, not hard, just enough to be heard. She opened it halfway, eyes squinting against the light. No apron, no small talk. "I was wondering," he said, "if I could work on the truck here. I've got my tools in the back of my Jeep and I can bring what I don't have tomorrow." She didn't answer right away. "You mean fix it here?" she asked. Tyler nodded. "I've got a few days off work, and I'd rather not drive it too far until I've gone over everything: fluids, belts, wiring. Figured the shade behind your barn's better than the motel lot." Irene looked past him as if weighing the silence around the house more than the actual request. Noah stood by the truck, holding a small wrench like it was a toy sword. He waved when he saw her. Irene didn't wave back, but her face softened just a fraction. "You can work here," she said finally, "but not in the barn." Tyler blinked. I know, still saying it." He nodded slowly. "Understood. There's a spigot out back. Use whatever's there. Don't move what you don't need to. And when you're done, pack up." "Got it." She was already turning back inside when she added, "If the boy wants water, holler." The door closed. Tyler stood still for a second, then let out a breath. That had gone better than expected. He walked back toward the truck where Noah had set up a work area on the dirt: 2 screwdrivers, a flashlight, and 3 rocks that served no clear purpose. "She say yes?" the boy asked. "More or less," Tyler said. Noah smiled. "We're gonna fix it?" "Looks like it." They started with the hood. It groaned open like an old man getting out of bed. Inside, a tangle of history and rust. The battery was weak, but not dead. The radiator hose was brittle, the fan belt frayed, but the bones were solid. As Tyler leaned in, he caught a glimpse of the barn's side wall, its wooden boards weathered gray, some bowed slightly outward. A single window, painted shut from the inside, reflected back the sun. Something about it made him pause. He remembered Irene's voice. Not in the barn, not unkind, but firm. Tyler respected boundaries, had to, after everything. Still, he couldn't help but wonder. People didn't guard empty spaces. The day was winding down. Shadows stretched long across the yard, and the air had cooled just enough to stop sticking to Tyler's skin. He sat under the edge of the barn's overhang, sorting bolts into an old tackle box Irene had let him borrow. Noah had grown bored of holding the flashlight, as expected. Now he was off by the side fence, playing with rocks and a crooked stick that looked vaguely like a sword. "I'm building a fort," he said when Tyler glanced over. "Good. Defend it with honor," Tyler replied. A few minutes passed in quiet, the good kind. Then came the sound of wood on wood, followed by a sharp thud. Tyler looked up. Noah stood frozen beside a small stack of crates that had been tucked behind a rain barrel near the back wall of the barn. One of them had toppled over. Its contents, a tin lunchbox, dusty and dented, had split open on the ground. "I didn't mean to," Noah started. Tyler was already up and walking. "It's okay. Just don't touch anything else, all right?" He crouched beside the mess. Inside the lunchbox were faded photographs, a key, a rusted compass, and a bundle of papers wrapped in yellowing string. Tyler picked them up gently. The top sheet was a letter, creases worn deep, but the handwriting still legible. The ink had bled in places, but not enough to erase it. He didn't mean to read it. But his eyes found the words anyway. April 7th. I still don't know the boy's name. He couldn't speak much when I pulled him out. Just coughed and bled and stared at me like I was made of smoke. But he lived. I remember the sound the metal made when it bent around us. I remember thinking, I'm not coming back from this. But I did, and so did he. He looked maybe 22, same age I was in my first tour. God help him if it wasn't his last. I've never written a letter like this. But if someday he reads it, if fate's funny like that, he should know he was braver than he realized. And I was luckier than I deserved. I don't know if I saved him or if he saved me by needing something I could still give. Either way, I remember him. I still do. H.C. Tyler stared at the paper for a long time. He didn't speak, didn't blink. The ache in his chest was quiet but sharp, like a note held too long on a string instrument just on the edge of breaking. He sat back on his heels. The sun caught the page, turning the edges gold. Noah crept closer, voice small. "Is it bad?" Tyler shook his head. "No, it's not bad." He folded the letter slowly, hands trembling just a little. "Let's put it back," he said. They returned the letter, the photos, the compass, everything exactly as they found it. Tyler closed the tin and set it carefully on the crate again. Not in the barn, that was the rule. But maybe this part wasn't the barn. Maybe this was something Hank had left where it could be found. Someday, by someone who'd understand. Tyler stood, brushing dirt from his jeans. He looked up at the barn's blank face. The quiet around them felt different now. Not emptiness, more like memory. The morning air was cooler than usual, dry, sharp, with the faint scent of metal and sun-warmed wood. Tyler had been working since just after dawn, long before Noah stirred. The tools lay in neat rows on a folded blanket beside the truck, a routine he found comfort in. Order meant progress. Today was the day. The new battery was in. Plugs replaced, hoses tightened, fluids checked twice. He'd cleaned the contacts and flushed the lines, humming to himself like he used to in the Corb's small tunes with no words, just breath through clenched teeth. He leaned back and stretched, the stiffness in his shoulders spreading down through his arms. Then he wiped his hands, stepped to the driver's side, and opened the door. Inside, the cab still smelled of dust and dry fabric, but now there was something else underneath: fresh oil, rubbed leather, the faint sharpness of WD-40. The keys hung from the ignition like they belonged there. Tyler paused before turning them. He closed his eyes, not praying, just listening. Behind him, unseen, Irene stood on the porch. She didn't lean on the railing or sit in her usual chair. She stood with both hands at her sides, expression unreadable, watching like a witness to something not hers to interfere with. He turned the key. At first, there was only the chug of the starter, then a long pause. Then, the engine came alive, a rough, low rumble that rattled through the truck's frame and into the ground beneath his boots. It sputtered once, then caught its rhythm uneven but proud, like an old voice clearing its throat after a long silence. Tyler smiled. Not a wide smile, just a small one, tight and full of something that sat deeper than joy. Relief, memory, purpose. He tapped the gas gently. The engine responded. "Still breathing, old girl." From the porch, Irene didn't move, but her eyes blinked slower. Her fingers flexed once, barely noticeable. The sound spilled into the yard, into the barn's shadow, and through the dry cottonwoods lining the edge of the fence. Birds took flight from nowhere. A squirrel darted from under the woodpile like it had forgotten trucks could speak. Noah ran outside in his socks, still pulling a shirt over his head. "Did it start?" he shouted. Tyler turned off the ignition and stepped out. "Started," he said. "Held steady." Noah threw both fists into the air like it was a touchdown. Then he ran toward the truck, circling it like it had turned into a spaceship. "Can we drive it? Can we take it to the store, to California?" "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Tyler said, laughing quietly. He looked back toward the porch. Irene was still there. Their eyes met just for a second. She didn't smile, but she gave a single nod, sharp, respectful. the kind of acknowledgement that meant something in places where words usually failed. Tyler nodded back. The sound of the engine still hung in the air, even though it was off, like the yard wasn't used to the absence of slints. Noah climbed into the passenger seat, pretending to steer. Tyler sat on the edge of the truck bed, watching his son, his hands still stained with grease. The truck wasn't fixed. Not completely, but it had spoken again. And for the first time in a long time, Tyler felt like something had listened. The afternoon light slanted low across the backyard, painting long golden bars between the fence posts. The heat had eased just enough for dirt to feel like soil again, not stone. Noah knelt near the back corner of the yard, a plastic trowel in hand, brows furrowed with the focus only kids and old men managed to summon when planting something that hadn't yet lived. Tyler watched from a few feet away, sitting on an upturned bucket, sipping water from a mason jar. The engine work was done for the day, but his mind hadn't settled. Then he saw movement out of the corner of his eye. Irene stepped off the porch, carrying something in both hands. A shallow metal basin filled with water and a few sprigs of green. Her gait was slower than usual, but steady, purposeful. She said nothing as she approached the boy. Noah looked up and blinked. "Are those for the garden?" Irene didn't correct him. Instead, she crouched slowly, carefully beside him and handed him a short, leafy stalk. "Tomato," she said simply. "If the sun doesn't burn it, it might live." Noah took it with both hands like it was glass. "Where should I put it?" Irene glanced across the yard, then pointed to a small patch just past the rusted clothesline, where the ground dipped slightly and the weeds had never quite taken root. "There," she said. "That's where he was going to start it." Tyler heard that. He didn't ask who he was. He already knew. Irene didn't say Hank's name. She didn't need to. She helped Noah clear a space. The boy dug a small hole, not deep, but careful. Irene guided his hands, not with instruction but with presence. An elbow here, a gentle nudge there. The basin of water sat beside them, catching the sun. Tyler didn't move. He just watched the lines of their shoulders, the way time folded in quiet places like this. A boy planting a future in the spot a man once promised he would. A woman kneeling again, not to mourn, but to help something grow. When Noah patted down the last bit of soil, Irene handed him a chipped measuring cup. "2 scoops," she said. He poured the water slowly. It soaked into the ground like the earth had been waiting to be asked. Irene stood, dusted her knees. She looked at Tyler, not long, not with sentiment, but with something closer to acknowledgement. "Storms come through here in July," she said. "If the roots take, it might even fruit." Tyler nodded. "We'll keep it watered." She didn't respond, just turned back toward the house. Halfway up the steps, she paused, one hand on the railing. "That corner's got good soil," she said almost to herself. "He picked it because it caught morning light." Then she went inside. Noah sat cross-legged by the tiny plant, watching it like it might bloom before sunset. Tyler walked over and ruffled his son's hair. "Nice work, farmer." "Can we name it?" the boy asked. Tyler looked down at the single green stalk. "Only if we promise to take care of it." Noah nodded solemnly. "Then his name's Hank." Tyler didn't say a word. He just sat beside his boy in the light of the garden that was finally starting. The sky had begun its quiet shift from afternoon to evening, softening into amber. The yard was still, the kind of stillness that didn't ask to be filled. Tyler stood by the driver's door, hand on the handle, the truck humming low from its earlier ignition. Noah had climbed into the passenger seat, feet dangling, grinning like they were about to drive to the moon. From the porch, Irene watched. Her arms were crossed, but not in defense, more like she was holding something inside, something that had waited too long. "You want to take her for a short ride?" Tyler called. Noah cheered. "Yes!" But before Tyler could step in, Irene's voice stopped him. "Wait!" He turned. She descended the steps slowly, her eyes not leaving the truck. "I haven't touched it since the funeral," she said. Tyler stepped back instinctively, giving her space. She came closer until she was standing just beside the open door. Her hand hovered for a moment before resting gently on the edge of the window. "The day they brought his things back, the uniform, the metal box, the flag, I couldn't look at any of it. But I came out here, stood where you're standing now, put my hand right here." Her fingers traced a faint line in the metal, a line no one else would have seen. "I thought maybe he'd left something behind. A smell, a sound, I don't know." She let out a dry breath, not quite a sigh. "I sat inside for maybe 10 minutes. Didn't start it. Didn't even move the seat. Just sat. Then I got out and never opened the door again." Tyler didn't interrupt. His hands hung loose at his sides, respectful. He understood grief like that, the kind that gets into your bones and rearranges how you touch the world. Irene looked inside the cab. "Smells different now. You cleaned it?" "A bit," Tyler said. She nodded. Then, to everyone's surprise, including her own, she placed both hands on the open door and eased herself into the seat. Noah watched from the passenger side, wide-eyed. "I didn't think I'd ever sit here again," she said, almost to herself. She ran her fingers over the dashboard, then over the worn leather of the steering wheel. Her hands paused on the keys. "He always said this truck would outlive us both," she said. "I told him he was dramatic. He said no, just practical." Tyler smiled quietly. After a moment, Irene stepped out, carefully, slowly. She didn't say anything more, just patted the hood once, then turned to Noah. "You take care of her," she said, nodding toward the truck. "She's got history in her bones." Noah nodded solemnly, like he'd been handed something sacred. Irene looked at Tyler one more time. "Thank you for not rushing it." He met her gaze. "Thank you for letting it happen." The truck rumbled again, soft and steady. But it wasn't the engine that filled the yard this time. It was the sound of something long held finally being released into air. The midday sun filtered through the truck's dusty windshield as Tyler wiped his hands and leaned back in the seat. The engine had settled into a calm, steady rhythm, and for once he didn't feel the need to fix or tinker. Just breathe. Noah was in the yard again, now working on what he called a watering rotation. 3 old milk jugs filled from the spigot, set at equal distances like little watchmen. Tyler shifted in the seat, reaching under for an old rag. Instead, his fingers grazed something crinkled, wedged tightly between the frame and the rusted rail. He tugged. It came out reluctantly. A folded paper, soft from years of compression, its edges torn in places like it had been unfolded and refolded too many times. He unfolded it slowly. A hand-drawn map, ink faded, but legible. It wasn't military, no grid lines, no scale, just rough lines and labels in careful block letters, almost like a child's drawing but more practiced. The layout was familiar. His eyes followed the landmarks, the windmill, the barn, the old fence line. It was this property. Hank had drawn a map of his own backyard. Tyler leaned closer. Near the bottom right corner, past the garden and just beyond the dying cottonwood tree, was a circle, marked with a small X and a single word, shade. No other explanation, no note, just a name for a place on Earth. Tyler looked up through the windshield toward the far end of the yard. The spot was real. A little rise in the dirt beyond the edge of the grid where the sun always dipped low in the evening and shadows hung a little longer. He opened the door and stepped out, map still in hand. Noah looked up. "What you got?" "Old map," Tyler said. Hank's, I think. Noah ran over, peering at it like it was pirate treasure. Is that our house? Tyler pointed. That's the garden. That's the porch. And that, he traced to the X, is something else. Together they walked toward the far end of the property. The wind was soft, dry, the kind that rustled weeds but never really cooled the skin. At the marked spot there was nothing obvious. Just dry soil, a patch of flattened grass, and a few stones lined in a curve. Not enough to form anything, but enough to make you pause. Noah bent down and brushed at the dirt. Why'd he mark this? I don't know, Tyler said. But he felt something shift inside him. Not fear, not wonder, just that old, slow click of a puzzle piece sliding closer to its place. He turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. Just a faint grease stain, maybe from a sandwich long forgotten. He folded it again and tucked it into his shirt pocket. Later he would ask Irene, but not yet. For now, it felt like the kind of question that needed time to rise like something buried under silence, waiting for the right hands to dig it up. Or maybe not to dig at all, maybe just to notice. Tyler stood a moment longer, watching the shadows stretch across the patch of land Hank once named. Shade, a place to rest, a place to remember. Or maybe a place to begin. The soil at the edge of the yard was drier than expected, hard-packed, sun-bleached. Tyler knelt beside a small pile of mismatched wooden slats and rusted nails. Irene stood a few feet away, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watching with that same steady silence she always carried when something mattered more than she let on. Was this the spot? Tyler asked. She nodded. Close enough? He marked it just past the last root line. Said it got the morning light, wouldn't burn in the afternoon. The wind picked up slightly, tossing Irene's hair across her cheek. She didn't brush it away. Together they started assembling the shelf. The boards were old but usable. Hank must have cut them years ago. Tyler could tell by the beveled edges and notches pre-marked in pencil. It was supposed to be simple. 3 levels tucked between 2 posts meant to hold herbs or seedlings, maybe tomatoes if the season was kind. I kept the pieces, Irene said after a while, voice low. He never built it, but I couldn't throw them out. They worked in rhythm. Tyler hammered. Irene steadied. A few times their hands met briefly as they passed tools fingers, brushing like strangers in a memory too big for both of them. Then just as Tyler reached to anchor the bottom slat, the ground gave a soft crunch under his boot. Something hollow, not wood, not stone. He paused, shifted back. A square of earth not quite level with the rest had slumped beneath the weight. He dug gently, fingertips scraping away at the surface. Then he saw the edge metal, rust-bitten but intact. A box. Roughly the size of a loaf of bread, tin with a hinged lid and a faded label he couldn't make out. Irene, he said quietly. She crouched beside him, hands tightening around her knees. Together they lifted it from the ground, dust scattered off like ash. Tyler set it on the grass between them. He didn't open it right away. He looked at her. She gave a short nod. He told me once he might leave something. Said if he couldn't say it out loud, maybe he'd write it down. Tyler unlatched the lid. Inside, a folded cloth, once navy blue, now dulled with time. A worn pocket knife. Its handle etched with initials HC. A small notepad, the kind soldiers used to keep dry under their shirts. And a photograph creased but protected. A young Irene, smiling in profile, caught mid-laugh. Hank stood behind her, out of focus, eyes fixed not on the camera, but on her. Tyler handed it to her without a word. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just held it, pressed the corner to her lips like a gesture older than grief. Tyler picked up the notepad. The first page was blank, but on the second, for the place we haven't grown yet. Maybe when I get back, or maybe for someone after me. That was all. No name, no date, just a seed left in metal and silence. Tyler looked at the shelf they had nearly finished. One board left. He stood and nailed it in place. Irene stood too, the photograph still in hand. She placed it gently inside the box and closed the lid. "Let's leave it here," she said. "Not buried, just placed, visible, alive." Tyler sat alone beneath the half-built shelf, the box resting open in his lap. The sky above was beginning to cool into evening, its blue thinning at the edges like breath on glass. Irene and Noah had gone back inside. She said she needed to put on water for tea, but Tyler suspected she knew what he was about to find, what he needed to find on his own. He thumbed through the notepad again, this time slower. Most of the pages were blank, but tucked near the end, written in a darker pen in a steadier hand, was something else. A page torn halfway out, then pressed back in. The handwriting was unmistakable, strong, straight. Tyler read, "To the kid in the sand. I never caught your name, but you looked at me like you'd already seen death once before. That kind of look doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing you've been given one more breath than you deserved. I dragged you out because I could. Because someone once did the same for me when I was too young to say thank you. I didn't think I'd remember your face, but I did. I hope you made it out. I hope you found someone to call you home. If you ever find this, then I guess the world's still got strange ways of finishing what it started." Hank Carter. Tyler's breath caught halfway through the final line. He lowered the notepad into his lap, but the words didn't leave him. He remembered that day in the smoke, in the fire, in the blood and gravel, the hand that pulled him out, the voice that said, "You're not dying today." He'd held on to that moment like a half-formed dream for over a decade, half certain he imagined it. But Hank remembered. He remembered him, not just the act, not just the mission, him. Tyler pressed the heel of his hand to his chest like he could quiet the sudden ache there, sharp and deep. Not pain, release. He looked out across the yard where Noah had left his watering cans tipped sideways. The little tomato plant stood upright near the garden line, leaves trembling in the breeze. The world didn't shift, it didn't roar, but something inside Tyler did. He had spent years wondering if that moment in the sand meant anything to anyone but him. Now he knew. It did. It mattered. He mattered. He wiped the corner of one eye with his sleeve, laughing once, short and broken. "Damn," he whispered. "You remembered." Noah's voice called faintly from inside the house. "Dad! Tea!" Tyler closed the notepad, tucked it carefully back into the box. He didn't need to say anything more. The words had been waiting long enough. And now they'd finally been heard. The house smelled like heat and old wood. Tyler followed Irene down the hallway, slim, narrow, quiet. Her steps were slower than usual. Not heavy, not hesitant, just careful. Like each footfall woke something in the floor. She stopped at the last door on the left. The handle was brass, dulled with time. She looked at it for a long moment, then, without speaking, she turned it. The door opened with a soft groan. The air inside was still, warmer than the rest of the house, not stifling but close. Dust floated in the slanting light from a single high window. The curtains were half drawn, filtering the sun into soft golden lines. Tyler stepped in behind her. Noah was outside, distracted with his fort. This wasn't for him yet. This was something older. The room wasn't large, 10 by 10 maybe. A twin bed with a wool blanket folded tight. A bookshelf with a handful of worn paperbacks, military history. Fly fishing. One copy of The Old Man and the Sea. a desk with nothing on it but a lamp and a dull coin resting on the base. Tyler's eyes drifted to the wall, a framed photo. Not of Hank in uniform, but Hank in a flannel shirt standing on a trail somewhere green. His smile wasn't big, but it was real. Irene walked slowly toward the bed. She sat on the edge, her hands resting on her knees. She didn't brush off the dust, didn't move the blanket. "I haven't been in here since the funeral," she said, voice low. Tyler said nothing. She looked around, eyes scanning the corners. "I kept thinking I'd come back, sort through things, donate the books, air it out." She gave a dry chuckle. "But I'd walk past the door and it was easier to keep walking." Tyler crossed to the bookshelf. He ran a finger along the spine of one book. A river runs through it. He pulled it out. Inside the cover, in thick pen, Hank had written a single line. "I don't mind getting older, I just mind not finishing what I started." Tyler returned the book to its place. Irene reached toward the nightstand, opened the drawer. Inside was a folded piece of cloth, a patch from Hank's last deployment. Still stiff, still bearing dust from somewhere far from here. She touched it once, then closed the drawer. For a while they didn't speak. The light through the window shifted, cutting diagonally across the floor now. Irene finally broke the silence. "He never wanted a big service. Said if anything happened, bury him quiet, keep the truck running, and plant tomatoes." Tyler smiled small. "We're working on that." She looked up at him. Her face held years, but in that moment it also held relief. Not the kind that wipes pain clean, the kind that says, maybe I don't have to hold all this alone anymore. "Thank you," she said. Tyler shook his head. "You're the one who opened the door." She glanced around again, softer now. "He'd want you to take something. From here." Tyler stepped back. "It's not mine to take." "I'm not offering," she said gently. "I'm passing it on." Her eyes moved to the desk. Tyler followed her gaze. The coin. He walked over and picked it up. It was a challenge coin. One side bore an eagle crest, the other a Navy emblem with a quote etched around the edge. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something else matters more." Tyler turned it in his hand. Heavy, cold. He slipped it into his pocket, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. The room remained unchanged, but something had moved inside it. The night came easy. Dinner was quiet, grilled vegetables, some beans from a can, and bread Tyler had picked up that morning. They ate at the kitchen table, mismatched plates and an old oil lamp in the center casting soft shadows on their faces. Noah talked the most. About the garden, about how the tomato plant had 2 new leaves, about how the old truck growled like a dragon, but in a good way. Irene smiled once, just a twitch at the corner of her mouth, but it stayed there longer than usual. After the dishes were washed, Tyler stepped out onto the porch. He leaned on the railing, arms folded, watching the last sliver of sun melt behind the hills. The air was cooler now, brushing against his skin like something familiar. He didn't hear her footsteps, but he knew it was Irene when she spoke. "You could stay." Tyler turned slightly. "We're not in a rush to leave. I was planning to find a place in town after the truck's ready." She shook her head. "That's not what I meant." He waited. She took a slow breath. "I mean, stay here, in the house, not as guests. Not in the truck bed or the motel once it's fixed. Just stay." Tyler blinked. He wasn't sure what response she expected. Maybe he wasn't sure what he felt himself. "Irene, I don't need help with the yard," she interrupted softly. "I'm not asking for rent. I'm just saying this place is too quiet, and I think Hank would have liked the sound of that boy in the mornings." Inside, Noah laughed. Something about pretending the broom was a lightsaber. Tyler looked through the window, then back at Irene. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded. "There's a room down the hall. You already know the way." The quiet stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. It was full of something that had been missing too long. Welcome. Not pity, not debt, not obligation, just space. Shared. After a while, Tyler said, "We'll need to help around, cooking, repairs, whatever you want." Irene half smiled again. "I'll make a list." He smiled back. "We'll earn our keep." "No need," she said. "Just don't burn the coffee." They stood together on the porch a while longer, listening to the creak of the house, the distant chirp of crickets. A porch light flickered on above them, yellow, soft. Inside, Noah peeked through the window. "Dad," he called, "where are we sleeping?" Tyler looked at Irene, then back at his son. "Home," he said. "We're sleeping at home." The wood came from the back of the barn, a few sturdy planks, thick with age and weather, still straight where it mattered. Tyler had checked each one, running his hand along the grain like feeling for pulse in an old friend. They decided on the corner near the fence under the shade of the cottonwood tree, just a few steps from the garden where Noah's tomato plant was beginning to flower. No one said it out loud, but it was understood. This would be Hank's corner. Not a shrine, not a grave, just a place to sit, to remember, to breathe beside what mattered. Tyler and Noah worked together on the frame. The boy held nails in his fist like treasure, passing them one at a time. Irene stood nearby, watching, holding a small tin of linseed oil and an old rag. It took most of the afternoon. Not because it was difficult, Tyler had built worse things with less, but because no one wanted to rush. When they finished the legs and arms, Tyler stood back and stretched his shoulders. The bench looked solid, honest, like something Hank would have built himself, maybe with fewer finishing touches and more profanity. Tyler turned to Irene. "You said you had something for the backrest?" She nodded and handed him a smooth cedar plank. Carved into it, clean, careful, were the words, "This spot stays warm because you were here." Below that, in smaller letters, HC, no dates, no ranks, just enough. Tyler swallowed the lump in his throat and fixed the plank in place with slow, steady hands. When he finished, Irene stepped forward. She opened the tin and dipped the rag, wiping it across the carved words. The oil deepened the grain, made the letters gleam gold against the wood. Noah sat down first. He bounced a little on the seat, then looked up. "Feels strong." "It is," Tyler said. He sat next. Irene joined them after a moment's pause. 3 people on one bench, shoulder to shoulder, looking out across the garden and the truck parked beyond. The sun was soft now, the edge of day curling into gold. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Noah broke the silence. "Do you think he'd like it?" Tyler nodded. "Yeah, I think he'd sit here too." Irene didn't say anything, but she placed one hand flat on the bench, fingers brushing the carved letters like greeting an old friend. She closed her eyes, not in pain, just present. After a while, she opened them again. "We never had a headstone," she said. "I spread his ashes up north where the river bends. That's where he wanted to go fishing when he got out." Tyler glanced over. She looked peaceful saying it, like the words had waited their turn. "This isn't a grave," she added. "It's just a place to sit, somewhere he won't be forgotten." Tyler nodded. Noah leaned back against the rail, legs kicking gently. "Can I bring books here?" "You can bring whatever you want," Irene said. Evening wrapped around them like a quiet coat. The wind rustled the cottonwood leaves, their undersides catching the last of the light. From the porch, the soft creak of the screen door swinging in the breeze. They didn't need anything else. No ceremony, no trumpet. Just 3 people, one bench, and the name of a man who made space for others even long after he was gone. And now, at last, someone had made space for him. The lamp on the kitchen table hummed faintly. Just a thread of sound in a house gone still. Irene unfolded the last letter with careful hands. The paper was thinner than the rest, written in pencil, pressed deep into the grain like Hank had leaned harder on the words than usual. There was no envelope, just a crease down the middle and the faint scent of oil and rain. Tyler sat across from her, elbows resting on the table, eyes lowered. He hadn't asked to read it, but when she found it tucked into the back of Hank's old field manual, he hadn't left the room either. Irene cleared her throat once. Then she read aloud, slow and steady. I don't know if this will ever be opened. It's late. I should be sleeping, but something's keeping me up tonight. You're asleep, Irene. You looked so peaceful, I didn't want to wake you. I figured I'd put this down in case I never get to say it in person. I've made my peace with most things, but there's one thing I keep thinking about. The boy. The one I pulled out of the wreck. He looked right through me, like he didn't believe he'd been saved. I hope someday he believes it. I hope he makes it home. Not just alive, but really home. The kind with a kitchen and bad coffee and someone small tugging on his sleeve asking for cereal. If he ever finds you this house, this old truck, be kind to him. He might not know what he's carrying. Most of us don't. I don't know his name, but if fate's smart, it'll send him here when he's ready. And if he's reading this or hearing it, kid, let me be clear. You're still here for a reason. Don't waste it on guilt. Live it. All of it. Even the boring parts. Especially the boring parts. That's the good stuff. Hank, Irene finished, her voice quieting not from tears, but from something more like reverence. The paper trembled slightly in her hand, then she laid it down on the table. Tyler didn't speak for a moment. His eyes were damp, but he didn't look away. Then he exhaled, long, measured, as if something that had been pressing against his chest finally released. I think, Tyler said softly, that's the first time anyone ever told me that out loud. Irene looked at him. He didn't mean Hank's words as cliché. They were oxygen, permission. She reached across the table and set her fingers gently over his. No squeeze, no pat, just contact, just knowing. Outside, the wind moved through the trees like an old voice humming. Inside, the kitchen lamp flickered, then steadied, and the letter lay open on the table, a farewell that was never mailed, and yet it had found its way right on time. The morning arrived slow and gold. Tyler stood at the edge of the gravel driveway, coffee in hand, looking up at the sign they'd hung just before sunrise. White painted letters, carefully stenciled on a piece of reclaimed wood from the old barn. Hank's place. Repairs. Restarts. Real things. The last 3 words were Irene's idea. When he asked why, she simply said, that's what he'd want to fix most. Behind him, the garage stood freshly painted light gray, with one long window and double doors that Tyler had rehinged himself. Nothing fancy. Just solid, honest work. Inside, a workbench, a tool wall, and space for one truck at a time. That was all they needed. He turned toward the yard. Noah was placing a small crate of cold sodas into a tin basin filled with ice. He wore a cap 2 sizes too big and a grin wide enough to split his face. Irene brought out folding chairs, 3 of them, and set them near the porch, angled just so. Not for guests, for them, for now. And there, parked front and center under the tree, its red paint buffed as far as it would go, stood the 1987 Ford. It didn't gleam, it didn't purr, but it stood tall, like something that had earned the right to rest. They'd mounted a small plaque on a cedar stake in the grass beside it. She brought people home. People began to arrive. Not in crowds, not in formal lines, just folks from town, curious or kind, or maybe both. An older man who used to deliver mail to the farm. A teenage girl who rode her bike out from the edge of town and asked shyly if the truck still ran. Tyler said yes, but only when it needed to. Someone brought muffins, someone else brought a box of old spark plugs, just in case. Noah gave unofficial tours of the garage, pointing at tools he only half knew the names of. Irene stood by the porch, nodding, answering soft questions about the sign, the name, the truck. Nobody asked about Hank directly, but everyone understood. Tyler didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. He walked over to the truck, placed one hand on the hood, and whispered, "We made it, sir." Then he stepped back. People smiled, stayed, laughed softly. Someone tuned a radio to an old country station. The world didn't change, but something had shifted. This was no longer a place where people passed through. This was a place you could return to. That was the thing about garages, real garages. They weren't just for fixing what was broken. They were for restarting what had been stalled, for cleaning off what time had dusted over, for hearing an engine again for the first time in a long time and remembering that it still ran, and sometimes for remembering the people who once kept it running. By noon, the sun hung high. The tomato plant in the garden bore 2 full red fruits, and the bench by the fence had its first visitors, a man and his daughter sitting in silence. Noah ran over, handed them cold drinks, and pointed at the plaque proudly. Tyler stood beside Irene. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. They watched the truck, the people, the porch, the plant, the sky, and for the first time in a long time, this place didn't feel like where something ended. It felt like where something had finally, fully begun. The gravel crunched under tires, slow, careful. The 1987 Ford backed out of the driveway like it remembered the path by heart. Tyler behind the wheel, one hand steady, the other resting lightly near the gear shift. Noah beside him, perched high on a folded blanket, waving through the open window with both hands like he was leaving on a great voyage. Irene stood on the porch, wrapped in her shawl, the air still cool despite the sun overhead. She held Hank's old coffee mug, ceramic, chipped at the rim, the words "World's Okayest Fisherman" barely visible now. The mug had been his favorite, not because of the joke, but because it fit his hand just right. She didn't drink from it, just held it. The truck eased onto the road. Tyler gave a small wave. No horn, no grand exit, just motion. Dust lifted quietly behind them. Irene stayed there still. She watched the red of the truck grow smaller down the hill, watched Noah's arm waving until it disappeared around the bend. The porch creaked behind her. She didn't turn, didn't need to. The warmth from the ceramic seeped into her fingers. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she could hear it. Not just the truck, but the sound of Hank's boots on the porch. The way he used to lean against the post without saying a word. The way he'd sip and sigh like even silence tasted better with coffee in the morning. She opened her eyes. The road was quiet again, but something in her chest wasn't. It was light. Not empty, light. She looked down at the mug, then at the sky, and then, without drama or weight, she whispered, "Go easy and come back." It wasn't meant for them to hear, but maybe it was meant to be said anyway. She turned and walked back inside. Behind her, the wind lifted a few leaves across the gravel, and the sun caught the edge of the truck's tire tracks, still fresh, still leading forward. They didn't say much that evening, just 3 people sitting on an old wooden bench sharing the first ripe tomato from a garden that used to be a promise. It was small, split slightly at the top, but it tasted like something worth waiting for. And as the sun dipped low, the porch light came on, not out of habit, but because someone was finally home. If this story stayed with you even just a little, feel free to like the video or subscribe so you'll know when the next quiet story arrives. Until then, may your coffee stay warm and your second chances grow roots.